I'll come to the third section of this lecture, the UN Coalition, Desert Shield, and Storm. At this point, remember, as I just mentioned, George Herbert Walker Bush, H.W. Bush, the ex-CIA director, literally a company man, as you know, the CIA is called the company, is in charge, and he's a technocrat. He's a nervous sort of guy. He doesn't have the sort of easy familiarity that his son has. I mean, his son is, he's nervous. And you'll see this. He wasn't. He was a technocrat. The son is sort of this good old backslapping kind of good time party guy. He was a cheerleader. Liked to party. And then he got religion. So Bush the first is aware that America is very nervous about fighting wars overseas, especially since Vietnam, which is now 15 years in the past. And the argument about Vietnam has continued. And so I am going to put up now this slide, which is called the Vietnam Syndrome. Now, this is an actual thing, which people started talking about. The right wing, especially the Republicans, when we say Republican, we're almost that means the right wing, and it has for the last long time. The feeling is, as I said, that the military was stabbed in the back by liberals, and this is the same very resonant phrase, the stab in the back phrase, because this is what Hitler said about the Treaty of Versailles. This is the treaty that ended World War I, that it stabbed Germany in the back. And, well, who did the stabbing? Well, as I say, and you can see here, okay, I didn't put it over. I didn't put up, but on the right wing. Who? Okay, the leftist, hippies, academics, peaceniks, quote unquote, students, especially the so-called liberal bleeding heart media. The media is considered to be, and was branded as being liberal, and there was this people were convinced there was a liberal bias in the media. Eventually somebody said, okay, let's do a test. Let's do some work on this. And they were like, no liberal bias. In fact, if anything, it turns out that it's actually biased vaguely towards the right. The liberal intelligentsia in the Northeast, Massachusetts, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, anywhere where education is, well, Ivy League educations, Ivy League schools are Princeton, Harvard, Yale, MIT, Amherst, and so on. Anywhere where education is paramount and social programs are felt to be a good idea, basically, and also on the West Coast. And the same groups that, remember, argued against the Vietnam War. And the right wing argues that given enough time and money, the war could have been won. And they still argue this. They argue that they were prevented from winning the war by Washington and by the Doves, people like me, basically, who are, are pacifists, and that although the Vietnam War seriously threatened America's economy and destabilized the market, still somehow they believe there could have been some kind of economic miracle that would have saved them. On the left, with many variations, as with on the right, the feeling that Vietnam was a serious error, not just geopolitically, but also morally and ethically, begins to harden, and the center and the center-left harden against further wars unless the issues are absolutely clear. So you have to prove to the left, if you want them to sign on, you have to prove to the left that it's going to have a direct impact on America, and that you have the right. That is, you have just cause. You are, jus ad bellum. That's right, and then you are going to engage in jus in bello because you're just, right. But for sure you have to have justice to war. Jus ad bellum. On the right-hand side, the Vietnam Syndrome meant that the left and the Democrats had become so gun-shy, so to speak, and afraid of another quagmire, which was another one of these myths that they used to talk about Vietnam, that they were so frightened of getting into trouble, basically worldwide, that it would be bad for America. And so the Vietnam Syndrome was sort of like being castrated as far as the right was concerned. America was scared to use its power, the right felt. On the left, Vietnam Syndrome meant that you had to look very carefully and question those in power and not allow a government to blindly drag you into another quagmire, to use the same term. not lie to you into another war and not engage in a fruitless combat for vague reasons. We're like, oh well, we'll know what the end state is when we get there. It's like, no. If you want a war, you have to give us exactly the outcomes that you want, and when we get those outcomes, we're leaving. It's over. It's finished. That's it. And so this is the Vietnam syndrome, and so I'm here's summarizing it for you. So why did we lose in Vietnam? Well, why did America lose in Vietnam? Well, because of hubris, that is pride that goes against God's will, basically. Overreach, economically, geopolitically, militarily, imperialism, okay, which is what I've been arguing, racism, yeah, it's a genocide. And it's a set of behaviors which basically is being identified as never to be repeated. On the right-hand side, that is on the right wing, loss in Vietnam because of shame and betrayal by the liberals, avoidance of full use of force, defeatism, anti-Americanism, political correctness. This is the beginning of the cultural wars have been going on all along, but they really heat up at this point. I mean, they get massively hot. And political correctness becomes a serious... This is the first time, really, that... That's not really quite true, but there is a serious divide between the right and the left. Okay. So, everybody agrees, however, that if the United States is going to go to war, it better be clean, fast, bloodless, and ideally casualty-free. Casualty-free? How are you going to do that? I mean, of course, you're going to kill the enemy. But on your side, no casualties. Like how many is too many? One is too many. So by this time, the generals and admirals who are in charge are people who had served as junior officers in Vietnam. So remember Al, who's a captain, right, in Go Tell the Spartans, says, I'm going to be, 10 years from now, I'm going to have a star, maybe 2. He knows exactly where he's going to be. Well, 10 years later, it'd be 1985, he probably would be, if he survived, would be a general or somebody who was commanding forces in this particular battle. And so they are aware of what military disaster looks like, the people who are running the show. And so what happened in the fighting in Iraq to push it out of Kuwait, because that's the idea, is to push Iraqi forces out of little Kuwait, protect Saudi oil fields, and make sure they don't get bombed, because you want to protect the oil is the main issue. And by default, protect Israel. This is always the subtext of what America does in the Middle East. Israel is this little tiny footprint which America expects to have to use if it has to go to war in the Middle East somewhere. And if they're desperate, they're going to negotiate with the Israelis to be allowed to land planes, bombers, whatever it is they need, and then fly on from there. Now, of course, if you want to land in Israel, you can put the fleet nearby and land right nearby. So, but at the same time, big heavy bombers, you need air bases for that. You can't fly big heavy bombers off aircraft carriers because it takes so long for them to get into the air. On the other hand, you can fly short, fast bombers like the B-2 off of an aircraft carrier, because the B-2 can take off like a rocket. So all of this people are like looking at this, and what comes up is what comes to be called the Powell Doctrine. This is after our good friend Colin Powell, who we've now met at My Lai, remember? Because Colin Powell is at the time the guy who was sent by the military to check out and see, hey, what happened at My Lai? And Colin Powell arrives at My Lai, and he goes away and writes a report and says, looks like there was some sort of bad stuff, but oh well, like it's wartime and stuff happens and so on. And Colin Powell then goes to the UN later on, this is a few years later, another 10 years later, and lies to the UN. Okay, but he says he was tricked, and he's still, he wants to know who tricked him. Just yesterday, I saw an article in the New York Times about, Colin Powell believes he was tricked. I was like, oh yeah, he doesn't just, he shouldn't just believe it. Well, I don't believe that for a second. I think I think he knew what he was doing. Anyway, the Powell Doctrine is very simple. You use force in such massive doses right away that you completely overwhelm your enemies. So that's kind of it. And then you go home. You don't wait around. You don't wait around to see what's going to happen next. You're not hoping for more. You're like, nope, that's it. You're going in to get your ball back. So you go in with you get all the schoolyard kids together, and you go in a massive squad, and one group of people gets the ball, and everybody else protects that group of people, and then everybody else runs out, and that's it. And you don't wait around to see whether or not you've left anybody on the battlefield. Forget it. We don't care. Get out, bring the ball back with you. The end. Yay! And that will be declared a victory. Like, that is our definition of victory. And that is pretty much how Desert Storm worked.